Hi everyone, today I'm going to walk you through how I paint darker skin tones. A lot of times I hear people say that darker skin tones are intimidating or they don't even know where to start. So here's my painting and I'm going to walk you through how I've created darker skin tones for this painting and how you can use the principles of what I'm saying on other paintings as well. So darker skin tones are not that much different from lighter skin tones. The same basic rules apply. All skin tones are a mix of red, blue, and yellow, and I use white to lighten the colors. Before I start, I like to mix some of the colors on my palette, and I like to compare them with my reference image or my model. That way I get to see if I need to make some colors lighter, cooler, warmer, what have you. I make sure I have some very dark tones, some mid-tones, and a couple of lighter ones. Now, for this painting, I used burnt umber as the basis of my darker tones, and I may have added a little bit of black in there. Using black can be a little bit tricky, and I use black to tone down colors or to gray them down so that you have a hint of the color, but it's not so strong. In any case, I am just putting in whatever values that I see, mid-tones, darker tones. I like to really put the darker tones first because they really are the basis of everything. They make context happen in a painting. So back to my painting, I am putting in the basic shapes using my darks and my mid-tones. When laying out the initial layers, it's really easy to get a little bit caught up in details. And that's really not advisable because sometimes you need to move things around, change things up, and that just means extra work having to take off the layer of paint or to manipulate the paint a little bit more than if you had not concentrated on all those details. As you can see, I'm reworking the mouth quite a bit. I was very frustrated there, and I used a mix of alizarin crimson and sienna, burnt sienna and raw sienna to really work with the mouth, and I'm not very happy with it, but that's why I don't have any details on there yet. I can manipulate it more and I can change it up as I go along. If I find myself obsessing over a place like I am currently doing, what I do is I just start working on the rest of the face, regardless of how far I am and how I feel it's going. I just step away or I take a break and I just go and work on other parts of the face or other parts of my painting. And that helps me put things into perspective. So that's really something to keep in mind, especially in the beginning of a painting. You have an idea of what it's supposed to look like. You have an idea of what you want the final result to look like. And it can get very tempting to get stuck in those details. And it's a trap everyone falls into. So don't feel too bad about it if you do that. But it's good to step back and it's good to reassess the painting after you've done work elsewhere and to come at it with a fresh perspective. And that's exactly what working on the rest of the face did for me right here because it gave context to the mouth, and I think I was just working on the mouth without really understanding what I wanted to do with it or how it would look when the rest of the face was in place. So now that I have the face fleshed out to a satisfactory level where I can come back and do the remainder of the work there, I'm going to go and do the rest of the figure. Now she is holding a cloth and her hands are right under her face. So I'm going to go ahead, as soon as I touch up a couple of things here, go and work on giving the rest of the body some definition. A lot of times I see people overwork the face and not really pay attention to the rest of the body. And I really encourage people to do it simultaneously because sometimes when you make changes in your paint, you might forget exactly what you did. I mean, it's happened to me. It's not that it doesn't happen to everyone. It happens to even me. So I like to work on it simultaneously so that if I do make any adjustments to any of the paint combinations that I'm using, I can kind of make it a cohesive unit rather than only in one place have used certain colors and have forgotten what I did, or when I can't replicate certain colors that I've used elsewhere. So the cloth I want to paint that the model is holding is white. And remember that when you're painting white, there are a ton of other colors that go into it. It is not just white. There are sometimes purples, blues, sometimes I see pinks, sometimes yellows. So really painting white drapery specifically is a lot of fun, but it also requires a lot of different colors. And if you feel intimidated by it, or if you're a little worried, how am I going to do this? Are there really that many colors? I really suggest doing a couple of practice sessions with just white drapery so that you can learn to trust yourself and to trust what you see. To create depth in the whites, I used a lot of violets in the darks, and I really wanted to use something that would offset the warmth of her skin tones as well. I mean, I used a lot of ochres and siennas in her skin tone, so I wanted something that would balance that out and kind of almost be a complementary to her skin tone. So I used a lot of violets. I used Egyptian violet and I used cobalt violet in different combinations, and I warmed it up and I cooled it down with reds and blues added to them. And I grayed it down with some blacks. So there you have my exact color preferences for creating whites in this painting. So at this stage of the painting, I'm starting to think about the background. The background right now is a toned burnt sienna for the canvas, and I added a little bit of darks on the background just to see how we would play with the rest of the colors. And I fully admit backgrounds are annoying, they are tricky. Sometimes they are just as much work as the rest of the main focus of your painting. Because if the background doesn't work, well, the work on the main focus of your painting, it might not work at all. It might seem lackluster. And that's exactly what happened because I thought I wanted to do a light background for this painting, and I started to do that. I put in a lot of blues into my whites, but I made it a light color because I thought that it would play well with the skin tones and it would give the skin tone just this luscious feel. But I wasn't really that happy with it, no matter how hard I tried. I mean, I just felt like it didn't work. And even though I had done a couple of sketches beforehand just to see what I would do with the background, I decided, okay, I'm going to abandon my idea of a light background because it just didn't work for me the way that the sketch did. I did have another sketch where I made the background a little bit darker and a little bit richer in tone, and I think that's what I'm going to do for this painting. So I'm going in and adding a little bit of darks and really trying to prepare the painting for a little bit of a different background experimentation. And just a little side note, just take a look at how I hold my brushes. So with oil painting brushes, the handles are really long and they really do help with being able to hold your brushes in different ways, and that way you get different strokes. So the next time you're painting, really work on letting go of how you think you should hold a paintbrush and just experiment with holding a paintbrush in different ways and see what your paintbrush is able to do at that point and the type of brush strokes that you're able to get with holding the paintbrush in different angles. So I'm defining the figure just a little bit more and adding a lot more darks to the figure. And I really want to give the background just one last go and see how it works with regards to the figure. Now, I don't particularly hate it like I thought I would, but I took a few steps back. I always do that when I'm stuck, especially when it comes to the background. It's really useful to be able to stop, step back, literally, like take a few steps back and look at the figure as if you haven't ever seen it before and assess if the background is working. And you know what? I decided it did not. So I'm going in and darkening up the background. And I added a little bit of white to the background already. It already is white, it's light. So I'm making the paint that I apply there considerably darker so that it really counteracts the paint that's already there. Now, if you find that really difficult to work with, you can always take a rag and try and clean it up a little bit, or maybe in a paintbrush dipped in a little bit of solvents and siphon it off a little bit off of there. But no, I just wanted to work with what I already had, and I thought it would be fun to see what the paint would do on the canvas. I took a couple of steps back and tried to evaluate the painting, and I decided that I really liked the darker background much more. It's much richer, and I feel like it complements her skin tones much more, and it adds the right feel and atmosphere to what I wanted to achieve. So I am doing just that. Developing the background is just as hard as developing every other part of your painting. One of the ways that I really like to develop a background and to use up all the paint I have on my palette and to make the painting look cohesive is to use just whatever I have on my palette and figure out a way to make it work in the background. I use almost all the colors that I used on her body in the background in varying degrees and in different places, and that just makes the background stand out so much more, and it just creates much better play with color, and it also stops the background from being really flat. And now that my background is darker, the colors read differently too. So I need to change up a little bit of the highlights in the drapery and in the figure. I need to just shift the colors a little bit more, and I'm defining the drapery a little bit. That's what happens when you change the background. It shifts the colors a little bit and changes how you read them. So it was really, really useful that I had already done a quick sketch before. I had done a charcoal sketch and a light and dark possible study of this painting, and I did the work already in the darker painting. So I know where to push my color and I know where to change things up. So all I did when I darkened up the background is I took out that study with the dark background and I saw what I had done to really make the painting work over there. And that's what I translated onto my larger painting. As I developed the figure, I take another step back and I decide I want to change the background a little bit more and deepen the values because I find it reading the same on the left and the right, and I find that there's not as much interest as I would like. So I'm darkening up part of the background because that just gives it a more dynamic feel. And again, I'm incorporating pretty much all the colors that I've used on my palette so far. I'm just mixing them up and darkening them and pushing them into the background. The camera isn't really picking up the rich colors that I've used in the background, and I hope in the final photo you will be able to see it. But it just feels more cohesive when the colors don't really come out of nowhere. They have been incorporated consistently throughout the entire painting, and so it feels like a family of colors that's being repeated. So now that I darkened one side of the background, I want the hair to stand out a little bit more, so I need to go in and readjust some of the highlights so that it stands out a little bit more. And I'm also going to go in and finish up the shoulder. And because that side of the background is a little bit darker, I want to introduce a little bit more light onto the skin, something that reflects a little bit more just to make it stand out from the background. And I know I always do this, but if you're like me and you leave a little bit of the figure or some part of your painting that requires a lot of mixing and knowing exactly what you mixed to the end, like I'm doing right now, I write down on a piece of paper what I use to mix the skin tones so that in case I added something and I forget, I just have a reference. I mean, I know this doesn't really happen that often, but once in a while, if I come back to a painting later that I was working on a while ago or something like that, I tend to forget exactly the combination that I might have used. So it's always useful to just write it down on a piece of paper. I didn't do that for this painting, but it's always useful to have just in case you might need it. Now I am going in, and remember how I was frustrated with her mouth? Now that I have context, it's much easier to decide what I want to do. So I'm finishing up the entire side of her face, and my model wore the tiniest little earring. It was very charming, and that's what I'm adding here. It's a lovely gold hoop, and I am putting in the final touches, and signing it is another issue because you never know exactly where to sign it. But there you go. Here is the final painting. And if you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe and leave a comment. That really helps. And until next time, happy painting.